Welcome to This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World. I'm your host, Melissa Batchelor, and today we're going to be talking about Boomers 3.0 and marketing to baby boomers in the third act of life. And I'm joined again by my guest, Larry Samuel. So welcome back, Larry. How are you?
Thank you for having me again.
So if somebody missed the first podcast that we did on age-friendly and ending ageism in America, maybe just briefly introduce yourself to us, and then we'll launch into Boomers 3.0.
Sure. Yes. Again, I'm Larry Samuel, and I'm based here in Miami, Florida. And for the last 5 years or so, I've been committed to the aging space in different ways. I first wrote a history of aging and ageism. And then I decided that a more practical approach would be in order. So I wrote this book, which is called Boomers 3.0, Marketing to Baby Boomers in Their Third Act of Life. And it's based on the concept that that boomers, 70 million of us, are still out there and will be around for another 2 or 3 decades, happily, in this third act of life. So we were in our first phase, which was about education and growing up. And then many of us were in the second act, 2.0, which is about, relationships and children and career. And now that we're in, our older 50s to mid 70s is where we are in terms of age. We've entered a new era in our lives. And so I felt I should present a different model for marketers to embrace as a sort of strategic platform when talking to baby boomers, because a lot of people were asking me advice in that space. Well, what are boomers about? What are they? And so I read everything I could on the topic. That's how I start. And then spoke to a lot of people, did a lot of field work, and formed together this model that are based on 10 core values, if you will, that boomers have in the third act of life. And I look at it as sort of their DNA, both individually and collectively. This is who we are as a generation. It's deeply rooted in the past because we're the same people that we were in the 60s and 70s. So we brought a lot of those values into today. In terms of how they're expressed, though, can be very differently. So a 65-year-old is going to express the idea of youthfulness, which is my first value, much differently than if he or she is 22, obviously. But I think the values are relevant and have value to all kinds of marketers. So that's the premise of the book.
Okay. So I agree with you. I think that most marketers are ignoring older customers.
Yeah.
So what are some of your recommendations for how to more effectively communicate with that generation specifically?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the values. Number one is youthfulness. Ironically, even though that our bodies are older, we were considered to be always sort of a permanently youthful generation. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I look at youthfulness as a state of mind or a philosophy. It's a way that you as a person view life. And I think as boomers, that's always going to stay with us. Whether we are 20 or 90, we still, see life through this, quote, youthful lens. And so for marketers, I think that has big implications because most marketers are thinking of us as old, not young, when inside, just because our bodies are old or older, inside, I believe that we're still young. So I think approaching that target market through a lens of youthfulness can be a very compelling proposition rather than the typical way, which is you're old now, you're in physical or cognitive decline, so here's a product for you. That's not a good way to approach us.
Right. And I think that type of mentality comes from actually not talking to a boomer. And I did a podcast series with the Reframing Aging Initiative. And when you ask someone, when we say the term like older adults, that's from 65 to 105.
Yeah.
There's a wide range. And unlike childhood, where you have these developmental milestones, it's like the Wild West when it comes to aging. Everybody's doing it differently. So there's not like one way. So what's another value that marketers could benefit from?
My number 2 value is knowledge. And this is about boomers' commitment to education and learning. That we were the most educated generation until millennials came along. They eclipsed us in both college degrees and in numbers. But we really valued knowledge. And this sort of is meant to discount the idea that, now that I'm in my 60s, I've learned everything I can, and I'm just sort of going to rely on what I've learned to date. It's not true at all. That research shows that we generate new brain cells until we're dead, basically. And so I'm perfectly capable of learning new things. And that's an important value for boomers, whether it be, taking classes at a community college or through traveling. It is a very popular way to do that. Learn about a different culture. I know folks who are taking music lessons and singing lessons or in language lessons. So I recommend that as marketers as a sort of a channel to capture boomers' attention, is that this product or service can be a way to add to your knowledge base, if you will.
Right. And the way I hear that from what you're talking about is two things within kind of the age-friendly community space, but it's lifelong learning. And then the second one, that the Center for Aging here at GW, that we add to kind of this age-friendly ecosystem, is creative aging. Okay. And so things like music, singing, we just did a podcast with Aroha Foundation, who works with museums, right, and tries to get older adults engaged in learning new art forms. So, yep. So what's the next value? The
next one, I'm going to get to creativity in a minute, but the next one I have is reinvention. And this also is trying to discount the idea that boomers are done and that we spend most of our time looking backwards and, oh boy, going to that first Led Zeppelin concert and stuff like that, and which we do, which I'm guilty of too, because it's history to young people when I tell people what I did. But at the same time, again, studies have showed that regardless of age, people are extremely resilient and adaptable and can reinvent themselves or renew themselves at any age, whether it be through work or through romance, or through spirituality, finding a new form of spirituality, if you will. We are constantly reshaping and morphing into different people. So I think that's an important one for marketers who are thinking mistakenly that we are who we are, we're not going to change. And whereas younger people are growing and morphing and changing, boomers are just as viable candidates for that sort of thinking.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes that has to do with life circumstances, but successful aging or positive aging is when you can embrace, these changes. And I think that the older you are, the more experience you have with rolling with the punches. Yeah. So. Okay. So I'm enjoying this. What's your next value?
Well, to your point of creativity, is that creativity is in our DNA. That was an idea that was embedded in us very early on in the 50s and 60s when we were growing up. We were sort of like the first generation to be taught to be creative. Now it's out of control. It's like creativity is the prime attribute perhaps for kids to learn how to do, but we sort of ushered that in. And again, there's research showing that creativity is good for your physical and mental health. That'll keep you alive longer, literally, if you're expressing your, individual creativity in some way. So I urge marketers to adopt that idea by thinking of their product or service as sort of an agent of creativity. How can what you're selling somehow enable a baby boomer to express his or her creativity in some way?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and actually, Dr. Gene Cohen, that founded the Center for Aging, did some of that seminal science. He was one of the first researchers with the National Institute of Aging. Okay. So that's where the humanities piece comes in to our center. Okay. So your next value.
Yes, the next value is bucket listing, everybody's favorite. A lot of us, those who do have the time and money to afford to do so, not all are expensive. You don't have to climb the Himalayas or do something so exotic. A lot of people are, but life happens very fast. You're working very hard and you're raising kids perhaps, and you didn't get around to doing something. It could be free, it could be writing a novel or learning how to paint or what have you. And by the way, a lot of these values overlap, which is fine. I mean,
Right.
life is messy. They don't fall into nice, clean little buckets, but the more powerful ones actually do overlap because you have different values sort of coalescing. So now some of us do have the time and money to go explore that avenue and pursuit. So I recommend to marketers to be an enabler of that. How can you present a product or service or develop a new product or service as a way for a baby boomer to cross something off his or her list, sort of a lifetime experience that he or she always wanted to do and now can.
It's great. I remember someone asking me about a bucket list, and at that point in my life, I was like, I'm so busy doing, like, just kind of surviving and trying to raise these 3 children that
Right.
a bucket list, what's that? So I do think sometimes at a certain, I mean, now I can begin to think about the bucket list since they're all about almost grown. So what is your next value?
Number 6 is self-actualization. We all remember Maslow's theory, his hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And Maslow he's become cool. He's the whole idea is extremely popular right now. And because there's a lot of truth to it. You do sort of go up through these stages often for most of us. And the ultimate one is sort of accepting that that you're a wiser person and that you should leverage that in some way. And through this emotional contentment and satisfaction that also comes along, enables you to sort of evolve as a human being. This is documented in the Triumph of Experience book. If you've read that, that's a classic in this field. This researcher, Triumph of Experience, who tracked people and found that there is a lot of truth to Maslow's theory that he wrote in 1943 of all. Boomers hadn't even been born yet, the first one. But I think whether consciously or unconsciously, a lot of folks in their 60s and 70s are sort of striving towards this ultimate level of evolution as a human being. So I think there's a lot of currency in that. So again, to marketers, how can you leverage in that way? How can your product or service be an agent of self-actualization, help this person sort of climb up the ladder in some way?
Okay. And then number 7?
Number 7 is community, that we were once the largest community in the world. Again, millennials now outnumber us, but there are 70 million of us still alive. The actual number is debated whether there were 76 or 78. It depends when you start the generation. But there's still a lot of us. I was surprised to see that there were so many baby boomers still alive. But about 10 million, 5 to 10 million have been replaced, if you will, by immigrants coming over to the United States. So that's why the number is so high at 70 million. There's about sort of 60 million, native born, but those people added some more numbers. So we're a very big group. We've always formed pods, what I call boomer pods, these little pockets based on a particular interest or passion. And I think those are a very powerful way for marketers to tap into boomers or any target market really through these communities of passion, if you will. And I wrote a book about it actually called Passion Points, where that we become not an experience-based economy, but a passion-based economy, that those sort of drive your behavior as you get older.
True. And to me, it kind of goes back to the blue zones with finding your tribe. Blue zones are these 5 places around the world that have a higher number of centenarians than the rest of the world. So, but kind of finding your tribe is part of that too. So then number 8.
Number 8 is activism. And this is about how we are politically engaged. We always have been, going back to the 60s and finding causes that we believed in, whether it was trying to end an unjust war or fighting for civil rights and gender equality. We were on the front lines of that and those values have stayed with us, even though the counterculture didn't succeed in all its goals. I think that idealism is still embedded within us, and we've passed that on to a great degree. But I also think that we form a very powerful political bloc, if you will, a constituency that that both people in the public and private sphere can reach out to. There's still a lot of us. We are collectively extremely wealthy. We're still the wealthiest generation. And so I think it would be wise for marketers to sort of tap into this innate activist spirit that boomers have. And we're living in a second golden age of activism, by the way. Employees are speaking out, and shareholders and stakeholders, and they are showing that the power resides in the people, which is a very 60s idea, but it's happening again right now. And I am just delighted to see it. What I'm not delighted about is that a lot of boomers are sitting back and not confronting ageism in a way that they can. And again, they hold a lot of money. They can sort of dictate what corporate America does to some extent. And I think they should leverage that in some way. So in my book, I argue that boomers really tried to express their activism in a way that they did 50 years ago.
Right. And I have to wonder what role kind of that self-imposed ageism plays in that, how many people just accept that, well, now I'm 65, so,
right.
I shouldn't be doing those things anymore. And it's like, no, you need to continue just like you did for race and gender.
Yeah.
It's kind of your encore activism for ageism.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
And so
by the way, these are sort of ascending. I don't know if you noticed, ascending in sort of importance. They start off with youthfulness, but where they're going is more, is like, these are sort of the ultimate things that boomers or any individual can do. So if you read the book, you'll see that. Yeah, there's
your own little Maslow.
Yeah, I totally riffed or stole his idea.
You built upon.
Yeah.
You creatively built upon Maslow.
Thank you. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So this one is purpose. And this is about how lots of us are still looking for meaning and purpose in our lives, whether it be reinventing ourselves, which goes back to an earlier value, or doing something different. So we're doing things like volunteering or mentoring other people, younger people, or coaching or teaching. I'm exploring teaching again because I didn't get around to doing much of that as a younger person. I was, busy consulting and writing. So this is the idea of giving back to society in some way, if, again, you have the time and money to do it. So I think that's a very powerful idea. So how can companies partner and help boomers do what they want to do? What causes are out there? What foundations or trusts or nonprofits would make sense to tie in with and partner with to sort of agent boomers to get them to do that?
Right. I mean, this can happen in any industry, really. We did an Age-Friendly Ecosystem Summit in May, and one of the examples that Age-Friendly Arlington shared was this program called Calling Angels, where the Age-Friendly Arlington partnered with Hilton. Okay. And so you had, the Hilton employees calling and checking on the older adults in Arlington. And, initially it was kind of more like, I'm going to call and check on you during the beginning of the pandemic, middle of pandemic. Right. But then they had all that snow in Texas, and, the older adult was calling to check on, the Hilton employee. So I think anything we build in with purpose and meaning has to be reciprocal. And we need to think of, how do we design it in that way? But, right. Everyone has to have meaning and purpose at all phases of life.
Absolutely. True that.
All right.
Okay, so
again, what is our encore choir?
The encore, how do you beat purpose, meaning and purpose? I mean, how do you top that? And that I call legacy. And this is about how will I be remembered? How can I achieve some sort of immortality? How can I live longer than my body will? So this to me is the ultimate thing, because boomers are thinking about their mortality for the first time, some of us. And again, and for some of us, the idea that we will live longer than our physical selves is a very powerful one. So you're seeing a lot of philanthropy, a lot of charity, a lot of donating time and money in different ways. For me, I've been thinking about legacy for a very long time. And the reason I started writing books, in fact, and I just had my 28th book published, was to leave a literal paper trail that I was here. I did not have children. So to me, the idea that somebody in 20 years is going to go to the library or go to a used bookstore and find something that I wrote, 30 years ago, interesting or valuable, that was a very compelling idea for me. Because I found that in my other work, consulting or working at real jobs, there was really no evidence that I did any of it. The money was there, but there was no remnant to suggest that I did the work. It just disappeared, whereas a book would live forever. So I think just borrowing that idea, how can a marketer enable someone of age to leave their mark on society in some way? Could be a very compelling idea. It's very ambitious, but that's sort of the ultimate, to me, marketing strategy of all.
Right. So these have all been really great ideas. And obviously I agree with all of them. So any final thought? I mean, part of the work we're going to do with this age-friendly social innovation challenge is to do this legacy kind of, even though it's a collective legacy, like what do we want our age-friendly communities to be thinking about to create a legacy for generations to come? Because if you build it, they will come type mentality. But and then I think probably our next stage will be to try to engage with some of these people that either foundations or people into philanthropy to say, okay, so here's the idea that we generated. Is this something you'd like to partner with us on to create, kind of co-create a legacy through these innovative ideas? So, so this is another great book, Boomers 3.0. And I love that the 3.0 is for the third act of life. That's a new term. I hadn't actually heard that term until probably a couple of podcasts here lately have referred to it as the third act of life. So I guess I'm still in the second act, but I'm on my way.
I think I'm on my fourth act. No, I'm just joking.
Well, I was going to ask you if there was, and there probably is. So when you figure that out, be sure to let me know. We'll do something about that too. So
sounds good. All right.
Well,
thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank you very much. It was. Okay.
Thank you for tuning in to This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World. I'm your host, Melissa Batchelor, and if you'd like to learn more, you can check out my other episodes on my YouTube channel by subscribing and ringing the bell to get immediate notifications when new content comes out. In addition, you can also find the audio version of the podcast on Amazon Music, Spotify, iTunes, and Stitcher. Please feel free to leave an honest review because more reviews mean more awareness of the podcast and helps us move towards an age-friendly world. If you have a comment or a question, you can visit my website, melissabphd.com. Go to the Contact Melissa tab, and you can leave me a voice message. You never know, it might just include your question or your comment in an upcoming episode.